Here we are. It's the pregame for Unfound on the Ground number 20. Let me make sure that I'm on here. And as always, I show up about 2 minutes, 5 or so minutes early just to make sure the tech is working well. I'm going to get those disclaimer chats up earlier like usual. Of course, I'll go through those when we actually get started. We have about 5 minutes. You can give me a sound check if you're out there. That would be great, just to make sure that you can hear. And hope everyone's well. If you're participating live, thank you, Linda. Hello, Linda. If you are participating live, if you're so inclined, please like this video. If you're watching this at a later time, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the Unfound Podcast Channel here on YouTube if you're not already a subscriber, and so forth. This is just that 5 minute pregame for the Unfound on the Ground number 20. Hello, Kathy. Unfound on the Ground number 20. And the disappearance of Amelia Earhart. Normally, I'm broadcasting from North Dakota, where I'm at, but traveling a bit this summer, I'm yet again at an undisclosed location somewhere out there. Um, Also, here, and I'll reiterate this when we get started, the Unfound Podcast Channel.com, the Unfound Podcast.com, the Unfound Podcast.com. I mistakenly said the Unfound Podcast Channel.com. That's wrong. The Unfound Podcast.com, which I will post here. Paula, hello. Again, Linda, Paula, Kathy. Hello to everybody. Oh, that's the proper link. Hope everyone's doing well. We again thank particularly our Unfound Think Tank members for their ongoing feedback and participation. We have about 3 minutes. Again, if you're watching this after it's been distributed, these first 5 minutes are usually, again, tech, make sure everything's up and running before we officially get started, although this part makes the cut, so to speak. So, we hard to believe, and again, thanks to our think tank members for your ongoing feedback and participation here. We also want to thank, of course, Ed Densel, the main voice, the proprietor, the manager of the Unfound podcast, and the team. Um, we have about 2 minutes to go before I go through the official material, and then we'll get started. Hope everyone's doing well. I know there's lots of hot weather across the country, some storms here and there too across the country. It is summertime. Some areas are more or less humid, but boy, I know in some places, regardless, it is hot for sure. For sure. And so far, we have Linda here and Kathy and Paula. Don't know, might get a few others, might not, but this is a great group right now, for sure. Again, this is the pregame. We have about a minute to go here before we officially start. Again, if you're watching this after it's been distributed, if you are so inclined, like the video. If you're here tonight participating, consider liking the video. If you're not a subscriber to this channel, when you watch this, consider subscribing for all the great content across the Unfound platform. The main aspect, of course, as I always emphasize, is the podcast, but Ed provides a range of outstanding content, some, of course, reserved in certain ways to the think tank members, but a lot of material for the public at large. So, also, of course, too, don't forget to share this video when it's out there, when it's distributed, if you're watching it then. And of course, all the great material from Unfound's YouTube channel or other platforms. Share the material. Okay, it's 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time. We're beginning again. Hello to Linda, Kathy, Paula. Let me go through the usual disclaimers here just as we get started. This is Unfound on the Ground number 20, The Disappearance of Amelia Earhart. This is going to be recorded, video and audio, including the text chat. Chat participation's an option. Again, welcome, welcome, welcome. For the journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes of Unfound, the audio and video recording, including text chat, of this digital meeting will be distributed by Unfound. By participating in this digital meeting, you agree to give Unfound permission to use the rendering of your words for journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes with no compensation to you from Unfound, its assistants, its affiliates, its partners, etc. This is Unfound on the Ground number 20, The Disappearance of Amelia Earhart. Don't forget the unfoundpodcast.com, which I posted there in the chat, which is helpful for our communication and a sorting running way for me to distribute some of the material that we utilize in site. I'm Eric Grabowski. I've been a guest once on Unfound, part of the assisting team to Ed, and I am, with Ed's guidance and the help of the team, the person who guides and facilitates this Unfound on the Ground. Again, the usual disclaimers. My words tonight don't necessarily reflect the opinions of my employing institution. I'm primarily a associate professor of communication, but do some cold case journalism on the side. Welcome, folks. We are talking about Amelia Earhart tonight. Of course, we've talked about now in episode number 11 for Unfound on the Ground, when we did do that wonderful overview episode, which many of you helped guide even as we were talking. But of course, we had some planned material. One of the cases we mentioned, of course, was Amelia Earhart. And so this is one of the ones we'll talk a little bit more tonight. Right here, we're just going with those basic guiding questions. What do we know? What don't we know? And of all the things we've talked about here on the Unfound on the Ground, what are some things we might want to apply if we got interested in the case? This is like the Hoffa case, which we've talked about. It's one of those cases that certainly capture the public mind and the public attention for good reason. And I remember, most likely, the first time I heard about the case, probably as a young child, watching a rerun, I guess, of that old show that was hosted by Leonard Nimoy, In Search Of. There was an episode about Amelia Earhart. I would have seen it most likely in the 80s, I think that was made in the 70s. Paula, Linda, Kathy, anyone want to recount just while I'm talking, when you first remember hearing about the case, or any basic things you want to mention? Obviously, it's one of those cases because it has, like Hoffa, captured attention. You'll hear discussions, possible updates. Of course, tonight we're going to focus on what are probably the three most credible scenarios. Okay, Linda, I heard about it when I was a little girl back in the 70s. Okay. Was it through television or just, do you remember? Maybe it was that same program, In Search of. So there are going to be other hypotheses, theories about this disappearance. And as you all know, I'm willing to follow those sorts of things if I think there's a some path of reason and evidence guiding that way. I think for the purposes of our discussion of this particular case, there's the three scenarios that I want to focus on tonight. However, because the case is a major one in American and really world history, you're going to see a lot of discussion and a lot of possibilities. Kathy, I never studied this case, but seen tidbits here and there over the years. Saw a documentary about her possibly being captured by the Japanese, and that is one of the ones we'll talk about tonight. An ID program. Linda, it was In Search of with Leonard Nimoy. There you go. So, the disappearance, and there's a lot of material. History.com has, and I'm not going to, you can look that up on your own, but I'll mention it by way of citation. History.com, History Channel, has, a number of, or some key write-ups that goes over some of the history. Um, and of course, as we'll see with some other discussion, they sort of intersect into some of that controversy in the past 5 to 10 years, 5 years. But Amelia Earhart, of course, was born in 1897, but it was in 1937, July, in which she disappeared. I think, as most people know, she was trying to basically fly around the world. It's good to put yourself in the context of that time, too, the 1930s. Um, turn of the century up through that time. I mean, every age has this where certain things are developing, happening, technology. But at that time, of course, flight was something that was something being pushed to new heights. Right? No pun intended. But this idea, she had been involved in flight, and she was looking to fly around the world, basically circumnavigate the globe, as you'll see that mentioned um, at times. So it was 1937, and I'm here on the NPR.org. There's a couple good articles there, and I have this article by Newman. This gets into some key research on NPR. I'm going to share this now quickly. And let me just get that out there if anyone wants to follow. So um, there's three uh, possibilities. And again, I think these are the three most credible, not just looking at this article, but some other material too. And I'm not completely discounting at all other possibilities, but I think these are the three most worthy of our attention tonight. And of course, one idea, and this NPR article by Newman um, basically mentions these three. Of course, that she simply, went down in the Pacific, and where, and that's of course is a large ocean, and um, unfortunately, it's you know a place that if someone were to crash, that would be a difficult situation. Um, there is the discussion about uh, that there was a crash landing somewhere, and that if she and her navigator Fred Noonan would have been captured by the Japanese forces of that time, which of course this was, if we know what we know about history around the time before, during, you know, World War II, obviously the Japanese were expanding and interested in the activity in that area. It would obviously be later where we would enter World War II, but there's things that were happening in terms of lead up and expansion. And then there's also the idea, and this Newman article obviously gets into some later research about this, um, that they crashed, um, probably the result of an issue of navigation on an island then known as Gardner Island, um, and it would be, and if I'm messing up this pronunciation, Niku Maoro, Niku Maoro, and I may not be getting that right, and that if they crashed on that island, that that they didn't survive too long after that time, um, and we'll get into that. So, Kathy or Linda or Paula, anything you want to add? And I'm just very basic overview. What do we know? Obviously, what we don't know now is, in that with that disappearance of Earhart and Noonan, her navigator. We're getting into that aspect. Anything, Kathy, Linda, Paula, you want to add that it's important for us to establish on the front end? Okay, great. Let me just keep going. So, just some um, backup here. Let me just mention along the way in terms of some of the historical material. Obviously, Earhart is one of those major American figures, not just obviously with aviation history. Um, she was, and I have a National Park Service site up here, which has some good backdrop. I'll share that. She made a solo flight across the Atlantic, 1932. She had obviously other achievements in flight and the buildup of flight. She is, just American history in general, a notable person. Um, Let me just put that out there for us to have a lot of. Okay, here we go. I read her. Okay, so Kathy, I read her extensive wiki a couple of weeks ago. Very technical, fascinating disappearance. Yeah, because part of understanding this disappearance, um, besides some of the material pertaining to the where and how they might have died, there's a lot of flight considerations and navigation considerations, even getting into issues of radio signals um, and how that can be interpreted. There's no doubt about it. Anything in particular, Kathy, you found? I mean, that's true. It's very technical. A lot of fascinating material there. And again, if anyone wants else to chime in, please do while I keep going. In terms of incorporating um, sort of what we do and what we're interested in terms of getting it credible material, a good place to go is that USA.gov, USA.gov. There's some um, obviously material there that the various agencies have in terms of that history. And so that's good material. And again, source documents. If you go to, there's a really good series here. If I go to the Library of Congress, if you want to get some general history, they have a search that was linked on one of the other pages that you can use to get some historical material about Amelia Earhart, which is very interesting for sure. Um, so we're over 80 years. So, this obviously goes back further than the Hoffa case. It's still on the American mind. Kathy, I've watched many air disaster programs since September, so I quickly jumped to a theory after knowing a lot more about her flight. So, Kathy, is there, of the three that I mentioned, that they went down in the Pacific, that they crashed on Gardner Island, or that they were captured by the Japanese? Is there one of those or another one that you favor, Kathy? Okay, and I'll keep sorting through some material. Of course, for what we do and what we're interested in, um, the question is, what are the source documents, the primary source documents. Then we go into what are the credible secondary sources, build from that, see what people have done. Now, this Newman article, and this is where, again, back to some of our discussion about forensic research and missing persons, which is an interest of ours. Newman in here talks about the research, and I shared the link already, about a gentleman named Jantz, Jantz. Now, this article was from 18, and this is a University of Tennessee researcher, and this is going back to um, data, not necessarily the bones themselves, because over time some of these things aren't as available. But there's been research over the years, particularly going back to a British expedition to that Gardner Island. Um, and remains that were found, and people trying to ascertain if those were, of course, either Earhart or Noonan. So there's the characteristics, and I'm going to come back to the chat here. Characteristics of what those bones may have indicated in terms of stature, sex, and so forth. And over the years, of course, this article goes through some of the research, and of course, if one wanted to hunt some of this down through the academic and other databases to look at some of the research and the controversies, but this material from 2018 actually revisits the idea, especially with some of the modern, more contemporary technology, especially this interesting thing. In this case, looking into this for this episode, I learned a little bit here about the Ford Fordisk, a computer program for estimating sex, ancestry, and stature from skeletal measurements. Okay, so this is again University of Knoxville or Tennessee, Knoxville. And so this research does seem to at least shed light again on the possibility that that these remains were at least Earhart. Again, if keep in mind we have two missing persons here, Earhart and Noonan, and so there's actually two missing people in this. Kathy, I think they ran out of fuel. They were running low, couldn't find Howland Island off course, ditched into the Pacific. So that what many would say is sort of the basic or simplest explanation, and it's very plausible, right? That happened, which would be right in some ways difficult to ascertain, right? That's a vast ocean. And Linda and Paul, if there's anything you want to chime in on. Of course, Jantz is an academic, so if you follow again, according to this article, you follow some of his research and his explanation and argumentation. Obviously, he acknowledges and recognizes other studies, at least one, if not more, that you know may have some different conclusions or point some different ways. Um, but as this article says by Newman, it might just be case that you said, Kathy, that they ran short of fuel and crashed into the open ocean, which may very be the case. Linda, I'll have to recheck this, but I thought they found a piece of her plane. Again, that is something that is discussed and at times questioned. And even if that's the case, of course, the location of where it may have been found, just based on different things I've read, could also raise more questions. Okay, so it sometimes does answers. Kathy, Amelia had parted ways with Harry Manning, who was an expert radio operator and knew Morse code. Earhart and Noonan did not. Yeah, interesting. Okay. So, this idea of the ongoing sort of analysis of the bones. And by the way, this is just an interesting find anyway for our previous discussions of. Um, this is from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville Forensic Anthropology Center. Right, just some interesting stuff. Fordisk. Right, that's an interesting thing, and that's linked in the article, but I'm going to put it here just in case. Kind of just goes to our general knowledge here. Um, you know, and they have a write up about too, right? March 2018, new forensic analysis indicates the bones were Earhart's. So, if she died on that island, there's other possible clothes and so forth that they found that you know might indicate that it was her. Now, if you remember from 11, um, we and I mentioned this here. This organization, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, they have been involved, and I believe this researcher mentioned in the NPR piece, and they have actually various links on their website to historical documents and so forth that are relevant to the Earhart disappearance. Earhart was unable to communicate due to several glitches with the ship at Highland Island that was supposed to guide the plane to the island. Correct. Yeah, which would play a role in this, right? If you're relying on certain communication and data basically for navigation for both Noonan and Earhart, that's going to be a problem um, for them. So this Earhart project of the TIGHAR TIGHAR group, right? They're testing the hypothesis that Earhart and Fred Noonan landed and eventually died on Gardner Island, now Mika Maru, in the Republic of Kiribati. And again, please excuse the possibility of my pronunciations. So this many years later, obviously there are challenges, but there uh, was the one link only for purchasing Fordisk. It's an academic research. This basically is from that university, and again, I don't, I can't, I'm not endorsing it in terms of something to buy, but I'm just giving the information out of it. This was developed through their university, and so they obviously have ways that people can purchase it to utilize it. It looks like, and with licensing, of course. Um, Something that can be used by academics and researchers. And then the second link I sent was their own PR on this Earhart research. Did you catch that one too, Linda? It talked a little bit more about that statement by the university. That was the news release. Of course, they're going to. That was their researcher, including Jantz. Um, and then, of course, he was collaborating with the TIGHAR group that I mentioned. Does that clear up your question, Linda? Okay. So now let's talk about the idea that um, the link went, yeah, and that's the link that was in the Newman article. Um, Kathy, Amelia had to make many stops circumnavigating the globe due to the fuel tanks at the time, and the communication at the time was quite inferior. She made it 22 hours when they disappeared. Yeah. It was going to be a challenging and daunting task, regardless. There's no doubt about it. Again, put yourself in the context of that time and the sort of the growth and the push of boundaries, I guess, on flight. I guess nowadays, and again, things happen and we want everyone to fly safely, but it's a risk. I guess nowadays we take certain things for granted of this. Historically, maybe not, but it's just something that's there. But think about the context of that time and the development of flight and the shifts in technology over and communication over time, for sure. This idea that okay, I'm going to move on from that piece. There's also, and this was cited in the NPR piece. It's another NPR piece, by Camelia Domonowski. And this idea, and this is where you'll see some discussion of History Channel and so forth. Plus, not many places to land in the South Pacific. Yeah, that's a good observation, Kathy. So, a lot of planning and implementation in a difficult situation in a very different time in terms of flight technology. So, there was a photograph that at least was part of this discussion, and you'll see here again. The NPR piece gives an overview, um, in this consideration about, were they captured by the Japanese? Did they somehow end up in, um, in a situation where they were captured and possibly killed by the Japanese? Well, there was this photograph discussion that you'll see, but it was disputed fairly quickly by someone who is some sort of military or history blogger, history uh, person, amateur, or I don't think they were a knowledgeable person from Japan who raised some questions, as did others. Then about that this is a problem. The photo doesn't predates by a couple years, which would have been the disappearance. Um, and so this controversy is from 2018. It's sort of the last stuff you see about this in particular. I know this Japanese possibility that they were captured by the Japanese for some is still an open question. It is interesting, certainly possible. Um, and you can see in the article just some perspective on the picture. Um, to me, it's a plausible sort of thing, especially at that time. But and I'm not tonight taking a definitive position on any of these three um, ideas of what happened to Earhart and Noonan. Was it okay? They crashed in the Pacific, or they ended up on this Gardner Island, or they ended up being captured and potentially killed by the Japanese, or died in prison or whatnot. These are the three I'm featuring tonight for sure. Please keep typing, folks, if you have anything for sure. You'll see, and this piece from Adler, Jerry Adler, 2015, and the Smithsonian Magazine is interesting. Um, you'll have that. Now, of course, that's before 2018. He does get into some of the alternative theories, but you'll see a discussion basically of the three that we're mentioning tonight. And some of those, the technical and communication matters are explicitly or implicitly dealt with. Um, and so this gets into some of the piece of the um, least piece of metal, and folks who have been interested in this case really from those days. And you can see, and I have here, yes, this is a really nice piece. The National Archives, and I'm back to that. Records remaining to Amelia Earhart. And again, this person, she had a pretty interesting life before this disappearance, and obviously this is an important, but the disappearance of Earhart and Noonan. Even getting back into some of the early materials about her life and early attempts to figure out what had happened. That's very important, interesting material if you were going to kind of get interested in this case. For sure. Linda, I know I asked before, but are these links posted somewhere that we can access them for this episode? They will be. For now, we have this running thing. I'm going to make sure to email some of them to the list, but they will be at some point. For now, it's always going to appear in this chat. I would go ahead and capture or bookmark some of them now. Does that make sense, Linda? Does that answer your question adequately? I'm always seemingly playing catch up on that. Yeah, but yep, resources are important. So Kathy or Linda or who else Paula, if anyone has, let's say we got interested in this. Of course, we have the source documents, get some of those historical documents, find the credible researchers, see what's been established. I've put out what are the three I think most credibly argued possibilities. Again, I'm not saying there aren't other ideas, which I'm not getting into tonight. So, what would be some things, Kathy or Linda or Paula, you would use to start digging into some of this more deeply? And I'm going to keep going um, while folks type. It is interesting to note, too, and I think it was Kathy that mentioned radio and communications. It's interesting because as I was navigating some um, government documents and write ups and just about her life in general, um, right, 1928, flew across the Atlantic Ocean. Um, so this article gets into um, this is from the national NIST.gov. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So 1928, okay, 1928. Also, she was a passenger on a seaplane called Friendship, which left Newfoundland, Canada, June 17th, 1928, and landed the next day in Wales in the United Kingdom. This was obviously a dangerous flight. Um, dealt with radio equipment. Um, and of course, this article, of course, is from the NIST, and they're interested in communications research, particularly obviously pertaining to technology and trends. So, in terms of the development of aircraft and radio, um, this gets into some of that history and actually some open question or two and so forth about her involvement in that. Um, so this is interesting. But I have this article here by Laura Ost, OST, and NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, U.S. Department of Commerce. It's an interesting article. Again, if you want to study a person who's disappeared, getting to know about their life is important anyway. Let's see. I know. Okay. Google Earth, Linda. Google Earth to view the area she was supposed to land, where they think she crashed, and any little places that could exist that we didn't know back then. Absolutely. Linda, I would also look into Japanese history from that time period, which is a good lead off of from the dispute about this picture, right? Which again, at least according to the blogger from Japan and some others, hey, that photo couldn't have been from 37 forward, had to be from 35. Again, I'm just reiterating what's out there. And also whether it's the theory or the idea of where they captured or other things, the cultural, again, we're back to culture, history from that time, Japan and otherwise becomes important. Kathy, books, articles, online documentaries. I think the most important component of this disappearance is the communication at the time. Better at to have attempted it 20, 30 years later, of course, in my opinion. I think, Kathy, that's a very valid point. Um, if I were going to, and I didn't get a chance to do this for here, but I would definitely go back and rewatch that Leonard Nimoy episode if you can find it. I'm sure it's on YouTube. In fact, I did. I don't know if it was in its entirety, but it's out there. Um, and I don't know who's holding the official, copyright and archives now for those old In Search of programs. But regardless, it would be, interesting even to rewatch that. And that's, predating some of these discussions we're looking at now. The interesting thing about this case, right? We think about the things we're interested in. You're getting into that historical cultural research. Kathy, you're emphasizing properly sort of how the technological communications history. Of course, I'm a public speaking, rhetoric, argumentation person, but yes, there are people across fields in government, etc., that study, get into technological history, obviously technology, understand it from a technical engineering and historical standpoint. And you can even see with some of this discussion about bones and remains and clothes and locations, how forensic science, anthropology, so forth play a role um, with that. Yeah, it was a good show. Never watched In Search of. Yeah, they covered a number of sort of mysteries at the time that were discussed. Things about human history, what happened to this person, how did that happen, and so forth. I don't know how many episodes they made, but it was on for a bit for sure. So it'd be something worthwhile. But I think the history component, the cultural component, very important. Let me make sure I'm not missing here. Yep. And the okay, don't remember if might have not posted this, but this is another good site here. This is from the GovInfo site from the U.S. Government Publishing Office. It gives some overview material, but it also, of course, gets into some of the materials that are out there, right? 1932, Amelia Earhart greets Congress after her solo flight across the Atlantic. 1982, President Reagan proclaims May 20th, 1982 is Amelia Earhart Day, um, and so forth. So you'll see this here. And the link to some of the government items that I mentioned are even at the bottom there, for sure. So I think for this case, in terms of the disappearance, obviously, the materials that pertain to the technology, the location, obviously Noonan and Earhart had experience, right? They had the interest, you could say, the push, but the experience to do these sorts of things. Um, but understanding the context of that time, of course, as a matter of historical interest, to see the big picture of the lives of Earhart and Noonan, and those around them, that would be important. That's what we're getting at. Um, we see how the forensic technology and research and analysis and argumentation play in this for sure. And the quest goes on, right? I think, as far as I'm concerned, and again, I don't claim to be an Amelia Earhart expert, but just trying to find what I can in terms of the credible discussions out there. Let's see, Kathy, but they needed a third person who knew Morse code. Yeah, yeah. That would be something to keep to note, right? In terms of sort of the challenges, contingencies, decisions, possibilities of this, for sure. Something to note. Um, I would, of course, and again, I always mentioned, and I'm not going to share any specific links, and some of the government websites have some of the older media and newspaper materials, but obviously I would, go to, um, you know, newspapers.com. Again, that's a paid database. You may find it at your local library, and so forth. And that's up to you whether you want to subscribe to it or not. But of course, with something like a newspapers.com, you can go back, you know, you know, to articles going back to her time forward, even ones that go forward in time that talk about the disappearance and this or that claim or commemorations of her life or commemorations of her disappearance. That would be important. Now, of course, some of the government websites again have older newspaper articles and so forth that would be relevant. So, yeah, newspapers.com is always going to be a go-to for me, um, for sure. And as always, I might also go on that Google News archive search, which again, Google really, as far as I know, doesn't really update, but they do, at least for the time being, uh, keep it going. You could, do some searches on there and go, right where it has search archive next to that, for sure. Let's see, Kathy, some mechanical problems with the antenna on top of the airplane. Yeah, I think Kathy, you're doing a really helpful tonight on really keying folks in on the technical side of this and the how the knowledge and the experience sort of couple with the technology of this. Um, of course, that does give us some helpful insights into what uh, Earhart and Noonan were dealing with or up against, and of course, that does provide some insights on what actually happened, for sure. Uh, Linda or Paula, if there's anything you want to add, please do, for sure. Um, great. It must for this. It might also be a good. Thank you. Got you, Linda. Nope. For this one too, it might be good to do a search on Google Books, um, just to see and out there. Um, Again, that's just something one could do. And again, when you're I'm sure there's been now again with Google Books that doesn't have every single book that's been ever made, but there's a lot of stuff digitized on there. Of course, it might be the kind of topic where you might see things versus mentionings versus entire books, but it could at least give you a landscape, um, a sense of what's out there for sure. I didn't have this as a guiding question, um, but I'm going to add it, kind of like since it was a question that we had with Hoffa. Paula, I don't know much about this, but I like having the resources to go back and look at. And again, please, as I share them tonight, at least bookmark a couple of them. Um, and I will this time through be better about emailing some out and will for sure continue to make an effort, or at least think about making an effort and actually implement it better on updating our data gems page on theunfoundpodcast.com, which I'm behind with. That's no one else's fault but mine. But we'll get to it. But bookmark the ones I'm sharing tonight, or at least some of them. Yeah, I have so many tabs open. That's a good problem to have, though, Linda. I'm going to take positive credit for that. But so we did talk a bit about why the Hoffa we captured our interest. This is over 80 years. Um, why do we think it still keeps our attention? Obviously, this was a high profile woman. She was part of that, um, the taking off, so to speak, of flight, no pun intended. This was capturing the public attention. Obviously, other people like Lindbergh and others were pushing forward. Uh, it's like my Linda. It's like my brain when I go to bed. Okay, well yeah, well it's we want everyone to get good sleep, but study this stuff well, but while still making sure to prioritize good sleep. But yeah, there's a lot of resources. But this many years later, um, this this still stays on our mind. This still captures the attention. Maybe more people should, I one of the things besides the importance of knowing what happened and for Amelia Earhart and for Noonan and their families and for the country, um, you this sort of case, of course, is again crossroads: history, culture, government, private industry, technology, communication. um, forensic research and analysis. Kathy, we don't know exactly what happened to Earhart's plane. The Pacific Ocean is too vast to do much searching. Well, yeah, especially, yeah. And if it was, unfortunately, a more simple explanation of them going down in the Pacific, that's going to make it really difficult. Linda, I think it's human nature to want to know the answers to questions most people couldn't answer. I agree. Personally, I always think a fresh look can help see things that weren't really looked at before, such as in this NPR piece, when the researcher was looking at some of the forensic data and analyzing it in some newer ways while still acknowledging not just the original research and so forth, but the ongoing conversation and possible correction and updating on that for sure. Yep, absolutely. I think too, and I mentioned the In Search of program, and I think Kathy, maybe Paula too, mentioned different programs and documentaries. It is the sort of case that, like Hoffa, gets a lot of coverage, has continued to get a lot of coverage. Certainly, if you go on a newspapers.com or the Google News Archive or some of the government websites, right, you're going to see a lot of material in newspapers or then eventually, if you go to YouTube or other sites, you'll see different documentaries. Certainly on cable, for sure, it continues to capture the public mind through the media, um, for sure. I do. If you go to back to the discussion about radio, this is a whole nother discussion too. That's interesting. You see, kind of cut through some of this discussion. This TIGHAR group, which again they're researching the possibility of this Gardner Island. Um, they get into, if you go to the Earhart project from their site, um, they get into some of the discussions about radio signals, which is interesting. And you see that in some of the different articles. And of course, in the early days, from the time of Earhart's disappearance for, years after up through, especially right away. I think it's up through 1940, maybe a little bit beyond. Obviously, there were search and efforts, but that interest continued over time, as you see from the different materials. Linda, the advancements we have made in air travel can also help to review her plane and potential issues she could have faced. Yeah, I think the TIGHAR group here gets into some of the, because they bring that sort of historical and expert perspective together. And this was one of the um, sources that I cited in episode 11. And so that they're trying to do that for sure. That's a good point. I also think, and it was mentioned tonight, the tech and by what you guys are saying is that the technology we have now, and whether that's air travel, Google Earth, Google Maps, boy, back to our discussions about geography, mapping, location, culture, right? That just in terms of how we think about those things, and that can give a fresh perspective, or at least give a sense of more understanding on certain things that we know, certain things that we don't know. The technicalities to this disappearance are extensive, and the mechanics and technical stuff is not my forte. Yeah, but Kathy, certainly you're bringing up a lot of interesting points tonight, though, and again, for me, it goes back to collaboration is key. And obviously, you see that with this, right? With some of the researchers, like in the Newman article mentioning that the gentleman that did the forensic analysis was collaborating with the TIGHAR group. That's important. For instance, collaboration is key. Yeah. So I think a lot of people, kind of like Hoffa, and I don't want to say more or less, but they've heard about the Earhart. they know about Amelia Earhart. Um, Maybe they've you know once in a while hear some claim. I know that again, besides In Search of, different venues over the years. Again, we've mentioned documentaries, videos, some guests on Coast to Coast AM. And again, I'm not gonna get into anything beyond the three ideas we talked about tonight, but there's definitely a conversation, and I think in this case, these are the three most viable possibilities. Eric, is there a specific place where the data gems would be posted? Yeah, give me that 1 second here. I'll share the link on the unfoundpodcast.com. And let me go here. And here we go. I have it. And then I'm gonna get to Kathy's comments. There it is. It's not updated, but it does have from the early start of these episodes onward a number of key sources, which with of course again my being behind. However, some of them I go back to, as you know. But that'll get you started, Linda. And make sure let me know, Linda, if you were able to click that link. Kathy, Linda, we know she was running low on fuel. Her plane couldn't carry much fuel, hence all the stops she had to make, right? Yeah, and I'm not sure if I'm using the right term. I'm not an air expert, but legs or segments of that for sure. Fueling for sure. Sort of piecing that. Kathy, you're providing some. Kathy and Linda providing some. Um, Thank you. Got it. Yep. Providing some pieces to kind of see what this big picture's like in terms of recreating it and understanding it for sure. Um, Again, I'm not going to argue for any of the three tonight. I find all of them plausible. The I think there is some reason to say, wow, some of that scientific research indicating the possibility of that they ended up on that Gardner Island and would have met their demise there. Um, you can read your own accounts, but um, that could have been very challenging and in some ways a potentially pretty brutal demise. Um, and But on the other hand, I could just as well, unfortunately, see that they crashed into the Pacific. I'm open to the idea that they fell into the hands of the Japanese, but that needs a lot more study and argument. Uh, Kathy, as I recall, she made 25 plus stops to refuel. So the refueling aspect is important for sure as we think through this. Okay, we have about, let's see, Linda, I still wonder if she was captured. Someone must have communicated to another person. So this, Linda, would be the um, question. And of course, with some of the material I've shared and some of the material that's out there, um, you get into a couple different aspects of that. One is what we knew, right? What we knew about that, and I mean we, the government. Um, and then, of course, what materials might be available in Japanese archives about that. Now, of course, that photo is disputed, as you know, but that wouldn't be the only aspect of that, right? Um, the article that I shared from Adler, Jerry Adler, 2015, Smithsonian Magazine, Will the Search for Amelia Earhart Ever End? Um, he gets a little more into aspects of some of those controversies and he cites some of the authors and persons who were involved with those views. And again, he explicitly or implicitly gets into some other avenues too that again I'm not necessarily getting into tonight, but That's why I feel Japanese history should be reviewed. Yes, their version of Pearl Harbor is different than what we are taught. Again, culture, history. Um, but yeah, absolutely. And then part of that discussion is what we knew at that time as it was happening. And you'll see that discussed there. But that's a whole area of research, and I think that that's a viable area of study if you're going to, as some have, and I think probably continue to do, dig deeply into that question of whether they did fall into the hands of the Japanese. Kathy, I feel it implausible she found an island to land on while running out of fuel in the vast Pacific, but it could have been a very freaky occurrence. Yeah, but if they were off course, if there was a navigation error and they ended up on that island, that could be possible, but you're saying it's implausible, right? Just because something's possible doesn't mean it's likely, right? So that's true. And through Unfound, of course, all of us like to establish what we can with the facts and deal with reasonable based on those facts when we're arguing and analyzing. And then, of course, try to establish whatever facts can be established through good research, listening to experts who do good research, and so forth. Linda, but if there was a ship that watched a plane crash, they would go check it out. Yeah, for sure. We have about 5 minutes left. As I said last time, we were shifting toward more of an hour long format. Again, if you're watching this tonight, or if you're participating tonight, or you're watching this later, consider liking this video. Consider sharing this video when it is searchable in public when you're watching it. For now, at least like it. And but when it is distributed, it'll be out there. Ed will distribute this at a later point in time. So please like it. Please share it. If you're not a subscriber to the Unfound Podcast Channel, please subscribe. Especially in a time of war, of course. Very good point. Of course, that was a time of expansion for the Japanese. There were tension. Thank you, Linda. My thumb is up. There were tensions, of course, as we know, between the United States and Japan. The United States, of course, would enter the war after that. Kathy, I learned a lot reading up on Earhart's disappearance. Thank you for covering this, Kathy. Linda, Paula, thank you for participating. Again, folks, take the time to go to theunfoundpodcast.com. I'll continue to try to do a better job of following up with links. We're always getting good feedback from think tank folks and from people who actually watch this later, even if they're not necessarily think tank folks. Appreciate that. Um, Hard to believe we're in number 20, but we are. So this was important. We're continuing to move towards thinking through some of these historical cases. And then what are some of the things that we've covered through Unfound on the Ground, the tools, avenues, whatever, to, if we were going to apply that to the case. Again, thanks to everyone. As I always say, someone out there knows something or knows someone who knows something. In this case, that may not be the same as a case that's 20, 30, 40 years old. But in reality, based on some of the good points that some of you, Linda, Kathy, Paula, are pointing to tonight, um, people hear things, they know about documents. So, in a way, and I'm talking globally now, but this many years later, that becomes more challenging. But the spirit or the principle behind what I'm saying there still matters. Um, so I want to thank everyone for participating. As always, um, thanks to Ed and Unfound, and continue to do good work, folks, our listeners. Thanks to everyone who participates. I hope everyone has a great week. Stay safe out there wherever you're at. And again, this was Unfound on the Ground number 20, The Disappearance of Amelia Earhart. This is Eric Grabowski again, signing off. Linda, Kathy, Paula, thank you, and you're welcome. Linda and everyone else. And we are done. Thank you, folks.